right. So, welcome to This is Freedom, a podcast where we talk about mental health, spirituality, and finding freedom in our lives. We join with guests to discuss topics that challenge our mental health and our spiritual health, and we explore holistic ways of coping. Here, we're sharing stories and hopefully inspiring a journey towards freedom. I'm your host, Michelle Solomon. It is mid-June and it's sunny today. Today we have a very special guest. Her name is Kendra Ferris, and I met Kendra through a friend and then at the library when I was running a program, a non-for-profit organization called Connect for Mental Health. And we offered peer support, education, and outreach to people in the community experiencing mental health challenges. And I did that for 10 years in London, Ontario. And the library was a collaborator of mine to host educational movie nights. And so I met Kendra that way. So welcome, Kendra. Thank you for being here. Honestly, it's been some time. We've been planning this for a while, and it's so good to have you. So
Thank you,
for being
Michelle,
here.
for inviting me to be part of the podcast. And you've been such like a part of my journey when it comes to like mental health and wellness
Aw.
that it's wonderful to be part of this latest chapter of the work that you do to support all of us in figuring out what wellness looks like for each of us.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
Were you
and you've
trying to make
noticed
me cry like at the first beginning moments of the pod?
just maybe we're trying to go to a vulnerable place.
A
And so
wonderful place.
we're starting off that way, maybe.
Thank you. It's really great to know that I had some influence on that. And because I really want to open up that conversation about wellness and what we need to do. And first, it's a conversation of just, hey, this is me, this is what I'm going through, and not being ashamed of it and having conversations. So
Yeah.
I
And
was,
that was,
yeah.
yeah, that was how we started. Like that was, I think, like from because we met through a friend, but then we went deep like relatively quickly and
Yes,
and
that's so
and
true.
started sharing some things about ourselves, and just you being as open and just as nonchalant isn't the word, but being as
Mm,
matter of fact as you are about your
right.
mental health was such a model for me to be able
Oh,
to be like, oh, this is just a part
yeah.
of my identity. It's a fact about my life and my biology and the way my brain works. And that's something that it's okay to talk about. And it's something that like, it was so welcoming to be able to speak to you about that and practice putting my mouth around some of the things that I was going and some of the things I was dealing with.
Wow. Honestly, sometimes we don't even know the effect we have on people
Mhm.
until we have conversations like this. So this is just such a blessing. Yeah, so welcome. And I'd like you just if you can introduce yourself, let listeners know who you are and whatever you'd like to share and like your background, maybe where you grew up, where you're from, and what you enjoy doing. And that.
Sure. Okay. So I was in a workshop recently where they asked us to introduce ourselves based on the roles that we've played in our life or that we currently play in our life.
Um,
And so I'm going to practice that a little bit because it felt really interesting to put that as the center of my
yeah.
intro. Okay, so I'm Kendra Ferris. I am a writer, a reader. I'm a dog parent. I'm a partner. I'm a daughter. I'm an aunt. I'm
Wow.
a lover of music and words and ideas. And so that those are the roles that I've played. And then I describe myself as a cheerful and curious person who lives with anxiety and depression.
Mm,
These are all things
yes.
that are like omnipresent and part of me all at the same time.
Yes. I like that because it's really about embracing, yeah, that this is a part of what I deal with. And it's something that I have, not who I am. Oh, and by the way, this is something that I
And
deal with.
also
Yeah.
because I think so my journey, so I wasn't diagnosed until I was later in my 20s. And
Mm,
so the past 20 years of my life have been focused on getting myself to a place where I understand what that
yeah.
diagnosis means, where I got over the fear of mental health and like mental
Yes.
illness, got over that denial piece, and then got to a place where I'm like, okay, like I can have habits and things in my life that help to keep me well
Mm,
and help to keep me good. And that, like that, and it's been a long journey. It's still a work in progress, but that was a shift because it was scary at first.
mm-hmm.
It was very scary, but
Yeah.
then learning more and meeting people and having conversations and learning
Mm-hmm.
more about myself. has been so
Mm-hmm.
big because it was really hard for
Yeah.
me to be like when I think about myself as a kid, like I grew up in a lot. I moved around a lot until I was about 5, and then
Yeah.
I grew up in Brampton after then. And
Okay.
so I was like curious, meeting people, like always interested in stuff, very involved in everything. And I'm like a keener person. Like keener would be a word that I would use to describe
Yes.
myself.
Same.
So like first person to put up their hand, first person to like to be involved in something. But also there's just like this other part of me that I was almost like I just sidelined and didn't talk about and just put away because I couldn't reconcile those two pieces of being cheerful and happy and
Oh,
so energetic, but also having this part of me
yeah.
where just like sometimes I'm
Yeah.
not that.
Yeah, they seem like things that don't go together well. Like, how can you be so
Exactly.
keen and, asking questions and cheerful, but yet, deal with anxiety and depression?
Yeah,
And I think that's a really important point to mention because some people, like, you can't tell necessarily. You can't see mental illness, like, unless
exactly.
it's you're down and out, you're distressed, and like things are happening behavior wise, or like you have to get help and go to the emergency or something like that. And yeah, it's good you mentioned that because it's something that's like, how do I reconcile this? I'm a keener, I'm so good at school or whatever. And like, how
Mm,
can I be dealing with this?
yep.
Anybody can.
And I think it's so interesting because so I started talking about mental health more with folks that I work with. And the conversations I've been having about people's surprise about learning that this is something that I deal with. And the thing that I tell people, I'm
Mhm.
like, I put a tremendous amount of effort
Right.
into being okay.
Mm.
Right? Like I put a
Yeah.
this has been my journey over
Hmm.
the 20 years is figuring out like what are my building blocks and what is my formula
Yeah.
for what helps me to be well.
Yeah.
And so what you see when I come to work and when I can like get in a webinar in front of 1600 people and present confidently, that's not an accident. Like that's not just
Yeah.
my default position. That is a product
Yeah.
of work and energy and effort
Yeah.
to get myself to a place where I can like present and feel
Yeah.
comfortable and feel confident.
Okay. I can definitely relate to that because it is a lot of work to have good mental health. It's not just something you just stumble across, and it takes effort. And sometimes people aren't willing to put that effort in, or there's like pain behind it or trauma behind things, and it's hard for people to go there. I think that is a way of being very realistic about mental health is to say, you know what, it's hard work. You have to address things and you have to work at it. And there's lots to learn about that, which is why I'm here and why I got into mental health. It's just it never gets boring for me. There's always something to learn. So you grew up in Brampton, but you moved around a lot until you were like 5 years old. And so how did anxiety and depression manifest?
So
What was it?
if I look back on my life, like this is
Mm-hmm.
something that was or could have been very obvious if people had been asking the right questions.
Yeah, that's true.
Had People thought I had ulcers when I was 10 years old. Like I had
Ooh.
like profound stomach issues from the time I was 10 that nobody could figure out why they existed. And it's like, hmm,
Mm.
maybe that was like something going on in my
Yes.
that was coming out in my gut.
Yes.
And then throughout my life, like I acted out and I like pushed boundaries and
Mm.
I like it showed up. I was still a very successful student and I was
Yeah.
very involved at school and at university I was a residence don. Like I was a very like high achieving person who
Right.
did exceptionally well, but who also like I would have moments where I would like retreat, absolutely retreat from people and just go to a place where I like
Mm.
absolutely shut down and was not functioning. And I had some patterns where I
Mm-hmm.
would go through these like some like times when I would be perfectly fine and sometimes when I was exceptionally low. But until I had like a profound crisis and my partner found me on the floor crying and not able to get up and go to work, that took that to get help and have someone
Mm-hmm.
say, this is something that you're dealing with. And until
Right.
then, it was just me like trying to do my best and trying to get by.
Yeah, when you talk about being the high achiever and the dawn and that, I feel like with anxiety, like we all have anxiety is natural, right? It's how we
Mhm.
respond to situations we're excited about. Our body gets ready. And there's a whole physiological aspect and science that I'm not going to get into in this podcast. But one thing I've noticed is that there is a motivating energy that we all have. And people who are very productive and very successful have this motivating energy that can easily transition into this paralyzing thing. It's like we're being
Mm.
propelled by this like energy, and it's good energy, but with good energy and great power, there comes the vice. And that's how I have interpreted this anxiety that some of us deal with. It's really interesting to me, like when I look like in hindsight too,
Yes.
to being a kid, and kids with anxiety do get these physical symptoms like what you experience. So looking back, it all makes sense.
It's so funny you talk about this energy because one of the things I've been thinking about, like as I was trying to get my head around what I wanted to talk about today and what would be useful is the way I describe mental health
Yeah.
is even keeled. And so
Mm.
that's like a term, it's a boat reference, which is interesting because
Yeah, yeah.
the keel is like the bottom part of a boat that keeps the boat steady and keeps the boat
Mhm.
straight. And so when you're talking
Oh,
about energy, what I'm thinking is just if we don't have this keel, that boat is going to be going sideways and zigzagging and going off in directions, and it's not going to be steady. It's not going to be in
yeah.
control. And so I'm resonating so much with this idea of anxiety as like an energy that can drive us,
Yep.
but left unchecked or left without that keel,
Mhm.
it can take us in
Yeah.
some wild directions.
Yeah, I do think of that, and we need to have a balance for that energy. So finding out ways to calm that energy. And I feel like for me, with my experience with bipolar disorder, there was always this knowing when to harness the energy and knowing when it wasn't getting to this point of like harm versus being a productive energy. And knowing things I could do to calm that energy and to direct it and focus it, whether it was like deep breathing or talking to a friend or just like emotionally expressing things. And yeah, and we'll get into the formula and the things that you use to cope. The reason why we wanted to get together and we were talking about a topic, a lot of us put our energy into work, into workplaces, and workplaces usually demand a certain level of this energy or this like masculine energy people have talked about. But with that, there comes problems. There is burnout and there's expectations from the higher ups and people in places of leadership. And then we become leaders and supervisors and managers as you've experienced. And just us talking about like the challenges that come from having these responsibilities and managing stress. Can you tell me a bit about your work and how it impacts your mental health and what you've learned about working with this stress?
So a couple things about my work so you could understand where I'm coming from. So I'm a person who has changed jobs many times in my career. I call myself a generalist. So like writing and education and learning
Mm,
are my formally trained skill sets. And I've used those in industries from like I've worked for private companies. You
hmm.
and I met when I was working at the library doing communications and
Yeah,
events for the library, which was
yeah,
where we connected.
that's what it was. Communications
Yeah.
and events, right?
Yes, exactly. And now I work in the public service. So I work for a huge organization of 65,000 people. And right
Wow.
now it's massive. Um, and I work in an area that supports those people. So I work in an HR function. And so my job is to kind of set direction and do training and support for people to help to move their careers forward and to help to navigate their journey through this giant organization. and
Wow.
and I have left jobs because they were bad for my mental health and they like
Mhm.
were absolutely like, working in sales in like a sales driven environment was no good because I'm
Yeah.
not motivated by like money is not my primary motivator. Like I want to help people.
Yes,
And
yes.
so that was just a misalignment, right? That just did
Mhm.
not work for me. So where I am now, there's a tremendous amount of alignment, but it's also that creates its own stresses because I take on like
Right.
there are 60 plus thousand people who like need some help and support.
Yeah.
And I'm in a position of influence where
Mhm.
I'm to be setting some structure and setting some direction for
Right.
some of these things. And that
Right.
is something that I've had to learn how to manage and how to deal with the both the tremendous opportunity that I have by working where I do, but
Yeah.
also the pressure of that.
Yeah. But what a great alignment for you because you've done so much work on your mental health and you have these tools and so much work experience and then to help people in human resources maximize their potential. I feel like that's like a divine alignment of how you've been used to help people based on your lived experiences. You said that you started to have anxiety and depression. You can look back as a child. How did your workplace affect that? And when did you actually get diagnosed, or when you started to realize that this is something you had to deal with, and how did you get help?
And so this question is so important because work was a precipitating factor to me going into a really bad crisis
Oh,
place because I was working in a place that it was like a sales driven environment. I felt a lot of pressure to
yeah.
conduct myself in ways that were not ethical in order
Mm,
to hit targets and in order to
yeah.
deliver the way that this organization was looking
Yeah.
at me to deliver. And that broke me. Like it was something that just felt so wrong and
Mm-hmm.
felt it did not sit well with me and I internalized it a whole bunch. I had taken a pause in my career and kind of switched directions. I had to move to a new city. Like there was a
Wow.
lot that like I needed to make this job work, but the job was absolutely not working. And it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't until and it literally took me down. That was like I could not go to work. Like I could not get myself and to
Wow.
go from a person who's just I
Mhm.
will just keep on trucking. Like I will keep on rolling. I am energetic. I can deal with anything to
Yeah.
go to a place where I could not get myself off my bedroom
Wow.
floor.
Yeah.
And it was, I like that day is hazy in my mind, but my partner tells me about it. And bless him for knowing that I worked for a big enough organization that had one of those assistance programs that you could call and
Right.
someone
Yeah.
get someone on the line because he was like, I don't know what to do with you.
Yeah.
And so he connected me with someone. And that was the first time I had a professional help. I got linked with a social worker who just got to know me. I took time off work. I
Mhm.
stepped back and I was working with a social worker who got to know me and helped me to understand myself and actually
Yeah.
got me enrolled in a program that was available in London called the First Episode Mood and Anxiety Program for young people. And
Ah, I
yeah,
I worked there. I
so this
didn't
is,
even know that you oh my gosh.
yeah,
That's a
yeah,
great program.
it was phenomenal. And this is throughout my whole journey, there are so many like stars that have aligned to help me to get the help. Because if
Mhm.
I wasn't living in London, I don't know what resources would have been available. This program is very unique,
Yes, it
like
is.
very
Yeah.
specific. And for people who are in that demographic, like that 20-ish age when some of these things start to crop up. And I worked with a psychiatrist through that program for a number of years to just learn and understand about myself. And I've gone through phases. So at that time I was using medication to get me
Mhm.
to a place where I could I
Yeah.
could feel like I was on that even keel and where even thinking about other possibilities was available to me because
Right.
was in a really bad place and I didn't know how to help myself. I was a person that helped people, right?
Right.
I was always a person that like, oh, let me help you. Let me be there for you. And I had no clue what to do
Yeah.
for myself.
And that's why the helpers need to take care of themselves. The people who are so empathetic to other people's feelings and go into jobs to help people, whether it's like in public service, nursing, or the
Mhm,
government, or
mhm,
anything. It's these people who need help with themselves. You have to put yourself first and learn how to manage your mental health, because what happens is you give and then you're like your energy is up and you're doing all these things and then you burn out.
yes.
And that happened to me too. And it unfortunately sometimes takes that burnout, that literally being on the floor, like your back is out, your back is out, like your mind is out, and
Yep.
you
Your
just
mind is
can't.
out. That
Yeah.
is, but what? No, because think about because people will be like, oh, I threw my back out on right
Yeah.
doing something,
Yeah.
but threw my mind out, like that's not something we would talk about, but it's the same
Hmm.
thing. It's
Yeah.
like something is going on that is acutely affecting me.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and you brought up burnout, and that is something that I've been on like for the last year and a bit. I have discovered some research that has given me such a more helpful frame to talk about burnout. And it's such a cool analogy. It talks about like first degree burnout, second degree burnout, and third
Hmm.
degree burnout. And so I found this research that this organizational psychologist guy was doing, and it resonated with me so much because it felt like my mental health journey, right? It
Yeah.
felt because what I've learned about myself is I need to like stop and pause and
Hmm.
focus on my wellness when I'm in
Yes.
that first degree stage, like when things are just starting to slip. That's
Mm-hmm.
when I need to double down.
Yeah.
And that's when I need to reach out for support. Because if I wait until it's a third degree burn, game over. If I wait until I'm all the way down,
Yeah.
climbing back out of that is going to be so hard.
Much harder. Yeah. And this is is it Nick Petrie's work you're
Yes,
talking about, right?
exactly.
Yeah. And
Yes.
we'll have a link in the description to Nick Petrie's work. You guys can check it out for yourself. It's called The 3 Degrees of Burnout, and it's available on LinkedIn. And it's posts about moving from burnout to growth. And it sounds like that's something you really benefited from.
It did it for sure. And I appreciate Nick Petrie so much because he's been just publishing this work as it's been evolving on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So he's not waiting to get a big old publication. He's not waiting until a book comes out. He has been publishing as he goes because
Yeah.
this was coming out of the pandemic, coming out of a time when a lot of people were feeling very empty.
Yeah.
And he just took responsibility to say, hey, I'm learning this really impressive stuff. I'm noticing some very distinct patterns about people and about how burnout is showing up and about how it's looking. So let me get this out there to the people because I
Yeah.
know y'all need it. And
Yeah.
and having it on an open platform like LinkedIn has been so cool because like I'm connected with people. We've chatted in the comments about some of his work and
Mm-hmm.
made some interesting connections with folks who are all dealing with the same struggle. And this is there's so many parallels between what he does and some of what you do to connect people and to
Mm-hmm.
talk about practical ways to deal with the fact
Yes.
that there's a lot demanding, like there's a lot of we're being pulled in a lot of different directions. There's a lot going on.
Yeah.
Like, how do we keep ourselves okay?
Yeah. What practical things did you learn from this burnout? And obviously, after being in the FEMAT program, how did you end up coping with the stress of work coming out of that program? Because the stress triggered you into it. And then how have you found just coping with work environments now?
So it's so much about something you were talking about at the beginning, like taking care of yourself first.
Yeah.
So before I even think about being Kendra the worker, right, and Kendra
Mhm.
someone who has that professional hat on, like it's about me doing those core things
Yeah.
that help to keep me good so that by the time I arrive at work, like I've already controlled a lot of the factors that can make me not okay. So I keep
Yeah.
referring to this formula, but that was like it took me like 2 years to get to a place where I like understood what helped me to be okay. And I literally like
Hmm.
for a long time I had a journal that I was like checking in on my mood every day, where I was wrote down what I ate, where I wrote down how many hours of sleep I
Uh-huh.
had, where I wrote down what kind of like relaxation things I did, what kind of self-care I had, where I talked about whatever stressors or triggers I had.
Yeah.
And like I took a super like scientific approach to it where I was like, I
Hmm.
did this for a while and then
Yes.
I looked for the patterns. I was like, okay, so if I've been like four
Hmm.
happy faces for seven
Yeah.
days in a row, like let me look at what I was doing on those preceding 14 days to get me to the many happy faces.
Amazing. Amazing. Honestly, I love that. You basically journaled everything that you were doing
Yep.
and figured out what tools helped you with your mood.
Yep.
And they call like this, it's important to have this social rhythm therapy where you do the same things every day. You have breakfast at the same time. I don't know, wake up and like for me, I'll wake up and I'll do my workout right away and learning thyself. We talked about learning about yourself. I learned about myself that in the morning, I have a lot of energy first thing in the morning.
Mm.
So instead of saying I'm so anxious in the morning, which I would often experience anxiety in the morning, I realized I had a lot of energy in the morning and I was ready to go.
That's
So
amazing. And you channeled
yeah,
that energy. You keep talking about
yeah,
harnessing and channeling. I'm like, what
yeah.
an amazing thing. Rather than letting that go unchecked, you're just like, let me use it for
Let me
something.
use it instead of being like, oh my God, I have all this stuff to do. And then, like this like morning anxiety, I would be like, okay, you have this energy. This is what you're going to do in the morning. You're going to wake up and you do your workout. So I would do 35 minutes of strength training or go for a walk. And
Amazing.
anxiety completely lowered down. So it's about, like you said, knowing yourself and journaling about things and what can you do.
It's
I think,
bringing that
yeah,
awareness to it because that's what it did for me
yeah,
because we're in autopilot for so much of our day. We're
hmm,
just going through the motions and doing the
yeah,
things and following the patterns, right?
yeah,
And so it was just bringing awareness to some of the things that I was doing that were helping and also to the
hmm,
things I was doing
that weren't helping.
that were not helping.
Yeah, yeah.
And
And that takes a lot of, I feel like, diligence and intention to be like, okay, this is what I did today. This worked, this didn't.
Mm.
And if we really did that, we would notice things, whether it may be people we interacted with, places we went, food that we ate, like timings of things, and
And it
just,
wasn't
yeah,
onerous. Like it wasn't a lot to do, to be honest. Like I bought a
yeah,
little moleskin, like I bought one of those little journal
yeah,
books.
yeah.
You can go to Dollarama,
I
like
love
whatever.
journals.
Oh,
I'm
I
obsessed.
bought a little book and then like I made a little grid on it and I was like, so what's my mood today? How much sleep did I get? What did I do for exercise? And I
Yeah,
just started writing down those
yeah,
things and it took me like 5 minutes at the end of my day. I'd do it before I went to bed and just have that reflective moment. And
yeah.
then every week or every 2 weeks or something, I would take a look at it and be like, okay, let's roll this up and let's see what the information is telling me.
Wow, that's amazing.
It was
So,
it was cool.
so how did you start to feel after this? How did your life change?
And so
And do you still do this, or do you find you've come into a rhythm? Is it still working for you?
I still do it. It is still so I have a little tiny journal now where I write a little bit of something every day, but at the top of it, so my formula is called I call it SERAS. And so it's an acronym. It's I need to sweat, I need to eat well, I need to have some relaxation, I need some affection, and I need sleep. Like this is
Okay.
my
I like that. I
acronym.
need some affection.
It's being very real. Like sometimes it's my dog, sometimes it's my niece, sometimes
Yes,
it's a friend, but wherever it's
absolutely.
coming from, like I need that connection and that like that feeling.
Yeah.
And so the acronyms, the letters have sometimes meant different things depending on the year and depending on what I needed. But right now, that's what it is. And at the top of my journal, I just write down my SERAS and a little note about what each of them
Yeah.
is.
So
And
this is
if
a
I,
self-made, sorry, this is a self-made acronym then.
correct, yeah, I made it up.
Wow. I love that. So this is Kendra Ferris's acronym, SERAS. For you, it might be something else, but look at
Yeah.
that. You're creating your own wellness tool from your
Mhm,
own awareness, from your own reflection and journaling.
mhm.
And that's amazing. I love it. So is that the
It's
formula that you were talking
That's
about?
the formula. This is my formula. And it's I can't remember what question you asked that got me there, but I still practice it.
Yeah. Do you still do it? Does it still help you?
It still helps me and
Yeah.
it's something, but what's so helpful is that it's also a tool for other people to talk to me about what's going on. Like my partner, he will
Mm.
ask me, he's like, how's yours this week?
Oh my goodness. I
And he
love
will
that.
he will ask me that question and I wouldn't be where I was without his support and his consistency and his willingness to learn about wellness and learn about me and learn about what keeps me good.
Yeah.
And him just asking that question, there were times I'll be honest, like I would get defensive at
Yes.
first when he would do it because I'd be like, "Are you telling me that
Yeah.
I'm not well? Are you telling me that I'm sick? What?" And I would go there. But
Mm.
now we have agreed that it's a little bit of a shorthand and it's a safe way for him to express care and concern for me and for him to be like, hey, like I'm noticing that you might be like slipping into that first degree, not so
Yeah.
good place. So I'm just going to
Yeah.
ask you about your SERAS. And it gives us an opening to have a conversation, to be like, yeah, my sleep's been terrible for the last week. Or, you know what, I've been slacking on my workouts. Thank you for asking me. Like, I need
Yeah.
to step that back up.
I love that. Okay, guys, so this is a 101 for being a great partner is to check in with your partner on their self-made formula. Even if they get mad and upset, because guess what? They made the formula for themselves. So that kind of
Mhm,
care about them. It gives you permission to check in with them about this formula, right? I love that. That's amazing. We talked about burnout and Nick Putri's work on
mhm,
burnout and how you climbed out of that space that was crippling for you after going to the FEMAT program
mhm.
and creating your own formula. What does mental health mean to you now? And are there any other ways that you find that you rise above besides what we've talked about so far?
And so what mental health means to me, because I'm thinking about, I don't know, what your podcast is called Freedom.
Yes.
And as I was thinking about this, I was like, okay, so like freedom, what does freedom look like? What does it mean for me to be free with the mental health stuff that I'm dealing with? Right? What
Yes.
does that feel like?
Yeah.
And for me, that is just being able to be, right? To not be in that place where I'm in my head, to not be in my place where I'm questioning and thinking and worrying and wondering all the time. That is like
Yeah.
when I'm at my best, it is when I am just like when I'm just able to be. And there are a lot of conditions that affect that. But when I
Yeah.
think about Kendra in her prime and Kendra when I'm functioning in my most optimal way, that's what it is.
Yeah.
Is that my brain isn't tripping me up, and I'm just like
Yeah.
in a flow.
And that makes sense because when you live with anxiety, that's a lot of what it is. It's worrying about the future and second guessing yourself. And being an empath, I think empaths could have a harder time with this, right?
Yeah.
Because we're so sensitive to people, to their feelings, to the facial expressions, to what we said. And oh, maybe we shouldn't have said that. And I remember just like going on for a week thinking about, I shouldn't have said this to someone. And you ruminate about things and you're so vigilant about things.
Mhm.
And so I resonate with that state of mental well-being, what freedom is, not having to worry and think about all these things.
And
Like,
it's and so when you're talking about like tools and things that help me to manage,
yeah.
one of the things that I always remind myself, because I go to that ruminating place, and I also go to a place
Mm-hmm.
where I like replay conversations over and over again, like game
Yeah.
tape, to try to figure out what I can do
So
differently.
annoying. So annoying.
It is, yeah, it can be paralyzing.
Yes.
And so when I think about conversations now, because I also do the opposite where I like plan ahead and try to anticipate what people are going to say.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
now I remind myself, I'm like, every conversation is a tennis match where I am serving the ball over the net to someone, and then they're
Yeah.
going to serve it back to me. And then depending on where that ball goes, I need to go with it. I'm not going to be able to know what's going to
Yeah.
happen. I'm just like, it's
Yeah.
unrealistic of me to think that I know what people are going to respond to me,
Yeah.
or to think that I can prepare for every possible eventuality.
Yeah.
Like I can just let myself go of that and be like, I'll go to the ball where it is, and then I'll
Yeah.
hit it back, and then they'll hit it back, and we can just keep going that way.
Yeah.
I don't need to play the whole game in advance in my head.
Yes. And I love that. So it sounds like you released some control.
Yeah. Oh,
And I remember that was one thing you wanted to talk about is control
yes. Yes.
because that's what I mean, it's such a careful balance because we want to have control over things. We want to have control over our schedule. Control is for me, it's synonymous with having boundaries, right?
Mhm.
With who you are, what you do, your values, who you spend time with, um, behaviors and things you won't let into your life in order to keep
Mhm.
that peace and balance. And so you're having control. But
Mhm.
then there are things that we don't have control over that happen, and we
Yes.
have to know how to release that control. And for me, a lot of that release comes through just my faith and believing that, you know what, there's something bigger than myself that is also at play here. And I think
Mhm.
that's a healthy place to be is when you realize that you don't have control over certain things, because then you can exhale and you can just let that parasympathetic nervous system process and let yourself be a bit easy on yourself.
And harness your energy towards the things that you can control
Yes.
rather than spinning your wheels and trying to get some traction on something that
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
not possible to get
Yeah.
traction on. Put your energy in a place that's productive and that is actually like within your sphere of influence. And
Yeah.
like, and I feel you so hard on having this like tenuous relationship with control, because it's also like it's if you hold something too tight, you're going to break it, right?
Yes. I like
And
that analogy.
I very much
Yeah.
have that feeling about,
Yeah.
it's true of relationships, it's true
Yeah.
of us with ourselves, that if we squeeze too hard and try to control too many
Yeah.
things, then we're gonna implode.
It breaks.
Yeah.
Sometimes we make a bigger mess out of things too, right? That's like how it implodes. You can make a bigger mess out of a situation.
Yeah. That's so true.
Yeah. And so how is your relationship with control now? Like, how do you your day to day?
It's different
Are
every
you
day.
holding yeah. Are you holding tight and breaking things and then sometimes you're like, "Eh."
Oh, I need to sweep that up.
And what makes it easier? What makes it easier?
Ooh, what makes it easier? That is such a good
Yeah,
question.
what makes it easier to release control or to yeah, to balance it?
Yeah, and because I think it's like, how can I remind? What do I do to remind myself, like in
Mhm.
those moments? Because I think a bit of it is being like in tune with myself and being like, because there'll be times when I'm at work and I am either going into a meeting or something is happening and I'm working on something, and I'll just be sitting there and I'll be like, ooh, like I do a little check in with myself, and I'm like, I
Yeah.
am very tight about this. Like I'm
Right.
holding to this so tight and feeling a
Mm.
certain way about something, right? And that's when I need to ask myself, like, is this something that I can actually do something about? Or is this something that is like somebody else's?
Yeah.
think about, and something that is like beyond my influence, which is hard, especially
Mm.
when a lot of the things that make my work challenging, and a lot of things frankly in life that are challenging,
Yeah.
or when you feel that tension from things that are like bigger than us and like systemic shit
Yeah.
that is going on,
Yeah.
and things that are outside
Yeah.
of us. And so that
Yeah.
reminder, it's not an excuse, and it's not saying, you know what, I can't do anything about that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just identifying, is this mine or is this something that's way bigger and
Yeah.
outside of me?
Yeah. So it sounds like what makes it easier for you to release control or to have a good balance with it is just back to that awareness again.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
So
And it's
so
because,
important.
but it's not an easy thing,
No.
because again, especially because we keep talking about energy, and
Mm.
like an object in motion is going to stay in motion. Right. And so, especially like when it
Yes.
starts to spin, and when I start to get in that place where I'm just like, like something's not okay, or I'm feeling agitated about something, something is like kicking up my anxiety.
Yeah.
Like you literally I need something that's going to stop
Yes.
that. And
So what stops it?
Wow, we are really getting into the nitty gritty of some of the ways we can manage anxiety. So stay tuned for part 2, episode 6 with Kendra Ferris, where we continue to discuss the things we've learned about overcoming anxiety. We also talk about how music, words, and ritual bring us into the present moment, into an awareness where we can dig deep and overcome.